Hello folks, with the launch of the War Within expansion coming ever closer, I thought this might be a good time to take a little look further into the future and discuss the kind of things that I'd personally like to see make a return at some point during the expansion. We pretty much know everything that's coming in the first patch of the War Within, but if there's one thing that we can take away from how the modern era WoW expansions are played out, is that while there are some things that are definitely part of a formula, Blizzard pretty much always has some surprises up their sleeves. Trying to second guess something that we've never seen before is pretty much impossible, so I thought it might be a bit of fun to take a look at some of the features that we've seen in the past that I'd really like to see them bring back. First up is instant side content. What I mean by this is examples like the horrific visions and withered training. While arguably delves do fit into this category, Blizzard seem to be intending delves to be more seasonal content which lasts the whole expansion, and I suspect they're hoping for it to have legs to go even beyond that. There is definitely a place for this type of content in-game, but seasonal content comes with a bit of a never-ending gear treadmill. The benefit of things like horrific visions and withered training is that it was content that was unique to a single patch and season, and that made those features feel a lot fresher as the team were able to be a little bit more out there with their design. There are other examples of side patch content, of course, but the distinguishing feature of these two was their very broad audiences. While by no means everyone likes horrific visions, partly because it was marred by coercive reward design, but the standout for both of these features was that they were widely played by both casual world content players and hardcore cutting edge raiders alike. Having some relevant side content that has a very broad appeal is a great way to fill content gaps for all types of players. Not everyone wants to play World of Warcraft for the entirety of a 5 to 6 month season, but given the way that Blizzard now incentivizes to stay subscribed with things like the trading post or the 6 to 12 month mounts, and I do think that having something that we can get our money's worth is a major benefit. Pretty much as soon as the Mage Tower was removed at the end of Legion, and we players were asking for its return, and for a long time it was by far the most popular thing to ask about in developer interviews. As is their wont, Blizzard would give fairly non-committal responses. That was until it made a return in the Shadowlands. Even though that return was basically the same encounters as before, the addition of new rewards did give it a new lease of life, at least for a little while at launch. While it does still remain in game in its current unchanging state, it's not super repeatable. Given the success of its return, I do think that this demonstrates that there is an appetite for very hard side content in the game, and it would be really nice to see Blizzard bring in an updated version with new encounters. It's probably not something that we could reasonably expect the dev team to be able to do every season, but an update once an expansion could offer some great filler content for players who don't find the usual open world stuff all that appealing. In the War Within, we will have the secret 13th delve that the developers promise will be significantly harder than the other delves, albeit as it's designed to be doable by any spec, they do acknowledge that it will not be quite as hard. While this has potential, when you compare one fight with the 7 different fights of the Mage Tower, that is if you multi-class, and I don't think it will quite live up to that expectation, but hopefully it will get enough interest to encourage Blizzard to take another look at something that's closer to the Mage Tower. Since Timewalking was first introduced back in Warlords of Draenor, Blizzard for several expansions operated a policy of extending it by adding the last but one expansion's dungeons into the rotation. Timewalking has always been an ultra popular feature, both for the many rewards but also as a leveling tool. Even as a DPS, queue times are rarely more than 5 minutes, which you can compare with the 20 or more minutes wait sometimes for the usual leveling dungeons, and it's a great way to bring old dungeons back into use and keep them relevant. Sadly in Dragonflight we didn't get the expected launch of Battle for Azeroth dungeons. Part of that was likely due to Remix, but unlike Timewalking, which is evergreen, Remix is, as far as we know, a one-off event. My concern is that this omission may have been either due to Blizzard starting to use the old dungeons for Mythic Plus, or as they are now, even for Mythic Zero and Heroic in the War Within. While that does serve to keep the dungeons relevant, the seasonal dungeons serve a very different market of players. Timewalking dungeons offer a change of pace and variety over the seasonal treadmill, and I do think it would be a huge shame to see this feature start to stagnate. Staying on the subject of timewalking, and the last time we got a new Timewalking Raid was back in Battle for Azeroth with the launch of the Firelands from Cataclysm. Early in Dragonflight, in a developer interview at Timewalking, Ian did drop a hint about Throne of Thunder. Now, I suspect that was ultimately a reference to the plans for Remix, but I do feel that with Timewalking being overdue some love, bringing back the most beloved Mist of Pandaria raid seems like a bit of a no-brainer. I don't know about all of you, but mid-expansion patch zones all seem to follow a very distinct formula, leaning heavily into the use of rares with a very sparse sprinkling of world quests. The Rare Fest zone is a formula which goes all the way back to the Timeless Isle in Mists of Pandaria, which is nearly 12 years old now. For me, there's only so much variations of rare spawn patterns you can do, and frankly that format's starting to become a little bit stale, something that was very evident with the Zaralek Caverns. I'd really like to see Blizzard look for ways to make these zones feel more varied, and one way to achieve that could be to return to the more old school questing hub approach, with something similar to an Argent Crusade or a Tillis Farm. That is, a system with plenty of rewards to chase, driven by daily and even weekly quest givers. While daily quest hubs in World of Warcraft have been a bit of a mixed bag, going from the heights of the old Netherwing reputation back in Burning Crusade all the way down to the depths of Baradin's Warden and Cataclysm, daily quest reputations, I guess it would be renowned these days, when done well can offer more variety to a patch than can the same old rares or that allowance of 2 world quests from a tiny pool. The best examples of daily hubs were the ones that would offer progression over time, with new or more quests opening up, which adds variety to the gameplay and potentially gives mid-expansion patches a lot more lasting power. Obviously, this isn't something that we would want every expansion, but if Blizzard continues the Dragonflight approach of having more frequent patches, they are going to need to expand their selection of core gameplay systems to avoid issues similar to the Forbidden Reach and Zaralek's Caverns, where we basically got 2 rare farm zones in a row. Let's move into the top 2 now with a remix style revamp for the old content leveling zones. While the ability to use Chromie Time to choose the expansion to level in is a great way to give us some variety when leveling alts, one of the biggest disappointments with it was that you basically just zip through a few zones and then you get kicked out. Unless you did it at the time, the game makes it very difficult to fully experience old expansion storylines. Even when I went back and did Lore Master, like a lot of players, I found that meant visiting zones in a kind of piecemeal fashion. And there's often a lot of story hidden behind old expansions or locked out by obscure unlock requirements that I suspect a lot of players never get to see. For example, it is very hard to figure out how to unlock the entirety of Legion or BfA these days. Even the usually comprehensive Wowheads information is often a bit out of date and patchy. Even though I had done all of the Pandaria story on the Alliance side previously, I'd never actually experienced it from end to end in the right order. That was until Remix. And when I ran a Horde alt through as well, I discovered at least the first part of the Darkspear Rebellion story, something I knew about but hadn't ever experienced in-game. Sadly, Remix didn't bring back the Baron's quest lines, which did leave a bit of a weird hole in the story. And that's another common feature of old content, is quite often bits of the story do get removed for, well, who knows why. Remix offered us probably the best presentation of an old expansion we've seen to date. It wasn't perfect, and I do think that had the team closed the loop by bringing back the missing bits like the Baron's questline, that could have enhanced the experience even further. It probably does take too long as a leveling tool. In Remix, I hit max level halfway through the campaign. But having that option to go back, even in a max level player, and experience an old storyline, I think could give a new lease of life for some of that old content, especially for more casual world content players. One idea I had is that in our new Warband world, is perhaps to have the option to pick a storyline campaign up from where another character left it off. This is already happening in current content, with the team being far more willing to let alts skip right through to the current patch content, and it seems to me that this could be extended to other content. Being able to level up maybe 2 to 3 characters while running through an old expansion storyline, I think it could be a very popular pastime in the mid to end of expansion lulls. And with new tech like follower dungeons and the new story mod, if these were leveraged, we could even follow the storylines through instanced content. There obviously would be a lot of work here, especially to recover lost storylines like Battle for Undercity and the Baron's questlines. But this is something that could be delivered gradually over time, perhaps a couple of old expansions each new expansion. So what's my number one? Well, these days, the one big feature that often seems to come up in developer interviews is the Brawler's Guild. The Brawler's Guild was a piece of side content that was a feature of every expansion from Mists of Pandaria through to Battle for Azeroth. There were 2 guilds. The Alliance one was under the Deep Run Tram in Stormwind, and the Horde one was in the Ring of Valor in Orgrimmar. Both guilds were essentially designed as underground fight clubs, and indeed there were plenty of references to the movie of the same name. The core of the Brawler's Guild was a series of single-player boss fights, but unlike most content, these were not instanced, meaning that you'd have to queue up for a fight while hanging about in the area. While at first glance that sounds annoying, the overall design was one that encouraged a lot of ad hoc social interactions. You could bet in other players, and there were options where the whole audience could suddenly be pulled into a group fight. As well as providing an option for players to play harder content solo, those ad hoc social interactions generated a fun vibe that really added to the experience, something that's sadly very rare in WoW. It really did feel that you were in a bar-based sports club. In Battle for Azeroth, it was taken to new heights with an extensive murder mystery questline that took you through the series of fights. Typically, Blizzard would remove the guild at the end of an expansion and introduce a new version in one of the minor patches in the next one. Sadly, in Shadowlands and Dragonflight, it's been nowhere to be seen. When the question of its return comes up in developer interviews, the standard response is always that they would like to bring it back in an evergreen format. While that's widely been interpreted as a commitment to have it return, likely in the War Within, my personal read of the responses is that it's more of a holding neither yay nor nay answer. I do personally hope it does make a return. The idea of an evergreen version sounds good in theory, but my concern is that this might mean, similar to the Shadowlands update of the Mage Tower, that we get one revamp and then it never changes again. While it is fun content that can last for a couple of seasons in World of Warcraft, a fixed, unchanging version I think could run out of steam. So for an evergreen format to work, it would need some kind of way to ensure updates or changes over time. Well, that's my favourites that I'd like to see brought back, but what about you? Are there any other old features you'd like to see return? Perhaps Mist of Pandaria scenarios, or even the dreaded island expeditions? Let me know in the comments down below. If you have enjoyed this video, then do make sure to let both me and YouTube know by hitting the like icon. And if you want to help my channel grow, then also make sure to hit the subscribe icon. Subscribing is by far the best way to support a channel like mine. I've a lot of fun and interesting content planned for the War Within, and if you want to know when my videos go live, also hit the bell icon. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.